Hello. Hello. How's it going? Happy Wednesday the 12th. The 12th. Looking at that calendar, and there's, not that much left of the month, but also it's going to be real packed full, and it's going to feel like it takes forever, I feel like. It's still quite sunny out. Lots of light left in the sky. The seasons are changing. Yeah, it's what, 18 days left in the month, I guess. Is that right? 30 minus 12. Yeah, 18, right? In 2 days, we'll know almost for certain whether we've sold our house. And then time to start furiously packing and possibly moving some stuff to storage ourselves, I guess. Each trip we do ourselves, I guess, probably saves at least a little money. And when is Farmhouse done school? Done. Done. Puppy's still licking his feet. Friday. Okay. So Friday and Saturday are the days that everything's happening. Hi. Hi, Sharkies. How's it going? How's your week treating you? Just the missus tonight. Mister's off to practice the arts. I'm a bit tired. This is Sharky. Remember last Friday I was like, I'm gonna have some background stress until this whole house thing is, until our subjects are removed. I was mistaken. It is not background stress. It's very much foreground stress. Not that there's anything nothing's. It's weird. So basically, where we're at right now is we haggled back and forth until we all agreed on an offer, right? And when that happens, our house is semi off the market, because we could still show it to people, but we can't accept any further offers while this one's standing, um, which is a little weird. And despite that, we still had a showing on Saturday. Um, and basically, at this point, we're waiting for subject removal, which means that the buyers have subjects. The house, the sale is subject to them bringing in an inspector if they choose to do that, and them getting their finances in order. They got to give us notice to bring in an inspector, and their final date for subject removal is on Friday. We haven't heard from them. And our agent isn't available tomorrow, so they can't bring in an inspector tomorrow. So they could, in theory, bring in an inspector on Friday, but that seems cutting it really close. Like, bring in an inspector on the day that you've got to decide whether or not you're removing your subjects and going ahead with the purchase. And at this point, like, if they backed out before Friday, they would owe us a fee of like a couple of $1,000s. It's, in the grand scheme of things, when you're looking at house purchasing, it's not a massive amount, but basically they'd be giving us a couple of $1,000s for nothing because they'd get nothing out of it, just getting out of the deal. But if they wait until, like, if they remove their subjects, at that point, if they back out, then it's a massive amount of money that they would have to pay us. It's their entire deposit on the house, which is a large sum. So yeah, it's weird. We're in this like weird like limbo of we're just waiting to here, are they removing, because they could remove their subjects early if they had their finances in order and they decided they weren't going to bring in an inspector. They could say, okay, subjects removed, but we just haven't heard anything. So it's like we're just sitting here like, I don't know, feels like we've got the sword hanging over our heads. What's the sword? The sword of Damocles, yes. I mean, it's not that severe. It's not going to kill us if they back out or whatever, but it's just, he will throw a big wrench in the plans, because then we're going to have to, like, figure out what happens with our... It's a line in Rocky Horror. Is it really? I don't remember that. Like, no matter what, our Japan trip is happening, but we'll have to, the house will have to go back on the market, and we'll have to figure out how that works with us being out of town for 3 weeks in that case, if they were to back out. I don't expect them to. The other thing is, just today we found out another unit in our complex just went on sale, but for a really low price, like too low of a price. Like, I don't know. Like, there's another unit across from us that has sold this year, and this other unit that's gone up is like over $100,000 lower in asking price than that unit or ours. And so our agent thinks, like, okay, they're not going to actually accept if somebody offered their asking price. They're hoping that, they're going to list it low and then get a lot of offers that are going to haggle against each other and drive the price up and end up selling high. And so our agent thinks that's kind of bad business, but also it's a little stressful for us, because it's kind of like, hopefully our buyer's agent, if they look at that and go, oh, look at this house is so cheap and it's in the same strata, like, hopefully their agent would go, okay, let's be real, they're not going to accept offers at that price. But there's still that bit of stress of, like, what if they decide to back out because of that other listing anyways? I don't like it. So, yeah. It's all out of our hands right now. It's all just, all we can do is wait and see what happens. And then after Friday, hopefully, then we just start packing and moving, and then we've got actual movers who also will do packing coming in on the 23rd, assuming everything goes ahead. Is that confirmed, Farmhouse, those movers, at this point? Oh, good. And then cleaners on the 25th. So I was just saying before you showed up, like, there's only 18 days left in the month, but they are going to be a busy 18 days. 10 a.m. on Sun. 10 a.m. on Sun. What? Oh. What? Oh, I see. A week from this Sunday. Yeah, yeah. No, I just had a bit of a like, hang on. What does that mean? Big stretch. And then, yeah. I went to physio today. And then I went home because it turns out that my appointment didn't get booked properly. So I rebooked for Friday. He's licking his paws a bunch because he went for a walk today and there were those sticky tree seed things, those like gross sap covered things on the ground, and he got some of them on his feet. And Farmos, gave his feet a little wash off with a cloth, but he still keeps licking his feet, even though that was hours ago. That residue takes forever to come off. Yeah. So yeah, I've got, in addition to subject removal, I've got physio on Friday. And then hopefully the actual subjects get removed. I'll let you know on our Friday stream how that goes. Hopefully I know by the stream on Friday. Hopefully they don't wait until midnight or whatever their cutoff time is. I don't actually know for certain what time they have to remove subjects by. And then Saturday is busy. It's my Nibbling's birthday, so we've got to go get a present before then. And then we're going to the Final Fantasy concert with the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra Saturday evening. We're going to go to a vegan restaurant ahead of time called Meat with some friends. Yeah, I hope so. It's interesting because I have played quite a few Final Fantasy games, right? Not all of them, though. A lot of them have shared music. There's going to be some songs that are just going to be, it's this song that is a take on the song that was in, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and whatever, right? But I haven't played a lot of the more recent games, and I feel like the more recent games are going to be the ones that have the more unique changes in music, they Oh yeah, Star Wars would be great. I've been to a video games live concert before, which was actually pretty incredible. Unfortunately, Farmos missed it through just bad circumstances. Things just didn't work out. But the whole thing was great. And then, surprise to all like my group of friends that were there, none of us knew about it ahead of time. But at the end, for their like encore, the original singer for the Pokemon theme song, for the like English version of the Pokemon theme song, I want to be the very best, came out, and they did a whole orchestra rendition of the extended version of that song, and the guy was going up and down, and like they had big like Pokeball beach balls in the audience, and he was going up and down the aisles. He was going hard. And it was, and of course the entire audience, like everybody there knew all the words. So everybody singing along with like, I don't know, singing the Pokemon theme song with the original singer of the Pokemon theme song was pretty cool. So that was a lot of fun. I'm sorry, Farmhouse. The Final Fantasy one, Final Fantasy songs, not many of them have words. There's like One Winged Angel has words, and the weird like Rammstein final boss theme from Final Fantasy X. That was a weird. That was weird. Final Fantasy X, the ending of that game, like not spoilers about the ending itself, but just the theme song, the final boss fight song, was by Rammstein, which when I think of Final Fantasy, especially like Final Fantasy X was Magitech fantasy, right? It wasn't like some Final Fantasy games are more futuristic. That's out of left field, right? Like Final Fantasy VII is more futuristic, and you know, but Final Fantasy VII is the one that had One Winged Angel. But if Final Fantasy VII had Rammstein, I feel like it would have been less weird than Final Fantasy X, which is all about like summons and mystic, like this weird priestess thing, and there's some strange, I don't know. The plot of Final Fantasy X is honestly really strange. But then you get to the final boss, which is like, against whatever it's against, and you starting it up, and then it's just all like, Rammstein just doing their thing, and it's like, what? Where did this come from? I'm curious whether that song's going to come up in the concert. Be a little surprised, but it could happen. But yeah, I haven't played a lot of the more recent games because they're working on 16 right now. 16 has not yet come out, but they've had trailers for it. But I haven't played 15 or 14. I think the most recent one I actually played was 12, and I didn't beat it. I wasn't that into it, to be honest. So I'm like, it's gonna be a little odd because we're going for this big, you're going there because you love Final Fantasy. Like, there's not much else reason to go. I mean, the music will be good no matter what, but you'll recognize it because it's Final Fantasy. But there will probably be songs that I'm not gonna recognize. And with these concerts, they'll frequently, they usually have like a big screen that shows scenes from some of the games that they're playing the music to at that time. And yeah, so there's going to be some of that I'm just going to be like, I don't know this. But let's see, probably the earliest Final Fantasy game I actually played and beat would have been Mystic Quest. It's hard to keep the timeline of when these games came out. That one was on Super Nintendo, and I actually had the cartridge. Not a great game, to be honest, Mystic Quest. I'm pretty sure I beat... I have trouble keeping the numbers of some of them straight, but the one with Terra, the like Magitech walking things and stuff, I'm pretty sure I beat that one. I think it's 5, but also 3. Or something. I don't remember whether I beat 6. I beat 7. I've watched a friend beat 8, but I wasn't that into 8 myself. Okay. I mean, 7 is just one of those like all-time great games. They've got a remake of it out now, but as far as I'm aware, it's a little odd in that I think they have changed the story in it. Like, yeah. I wonder whether they'll play any Kingdom Hearts versions of any of the music. But yeah, 7 is just one of those, like, the original of Final Fantasy 7 is just a classic. It's one of the most popular RPGs of all time, and for a good reason. And then the Final Fantasy 7 remake is out, but I'm fairly certain that, like, well, first of all, Final Fantasy 7 remake part 1 is out. And so, the story goes up to a point, and then it's just to be continued. And as far as I'm aware, they have changed, like, significant story beats. I don't know to what extent, in what way, but it seems like some of the characters and their motivations have changed, and big plot points have changed. So if you're looking for the Final Fantasy VII experience, I would not start with the remake. Yeah, I watched a friend, like I watched basically the entirety of 8. I just didn't actually have my hands on the controller. I played and beat 9. Um, I played a lot of 10, and I've seen the ending for it. I've watched someone else, like the same friend that I watched beat 8, I watched beat 10. 10. There are things about 10 that I like, and there are things about it that I dislike. And then 12, I think, is the one with the character named Lightning, which I played quite a lot of that game, but it was really weird. It, like, you know, in Final Fantasy games, right, like you go through some story, eventually you get into like a big open world, and then you can kind of wander around, go to different places. There's a story to continue following, so you go to a specific place, you continue the story. Um, but Final Fantasy 12, I played for over 20 hours, and it was just like going down one long, beautiful hallway. Like, every now and then, like, basically your map would just look like a long path, and that all you could do was follow the path, and you'd hit boss fights and story beats, and every now and then a little branch from the path would do that. Um, and the game was beautiful, and the combat was interesting, but there was no deviation. You were going in essentially, you were going in a straight line the entire time. You know, not literally, the path was going whatever, and you were following it, but you couldn't go anywhere else. You just followed the path. And some of the fights were like very difficult. There was a lot of challenge, and there was a lot of, you know, plot and story taking place. And you'd hit shops and things like that, although I think the shops were just on save points. So you get to a save point and you could use it as a shop. Yeah, there was, and so that's why I stopped playing. I heard that eventually it would open up, but I played for over 20 hours. Like, and it just never did. And it was a beautiful game. It was like, it looked fantastic. The graphics were amazing, and like I said, the combat was interesting and kind of and fun at points and difficult at points. Um, but just like basically no choice. Like it was just, it felt like a walking simulator at times. Just like, okay, you know, go down the little branch and find the item, and then you're back on the main path again. Like, it was weird. It was honestly really strange. So, yeah. So I never beat that one because I just got bored of going in a straight line. And then I think, yeah, 12, maybe that was 13. After 10, it gets difficult to track the actual names of the games because some of them are like MMOs. Um, and that's also when they started having, like, there was 10 and then 10-2, which is a weird thing. So yeah, I don't know. I played like, there was one with the like Sand Sea. I played some of that, and then I played some of the one with Lightning. Yeah, I'm Captain Bosch. Hey everybody, I'm Captain Bosch. I'm Bosch von Rosenberg. I think 11 might have been like a failed MMO. Not failed, but like it's shut down at this point. I think there's been more than one MMO. There's one MMO that's still going and is very popular. Apparently, it's just great. It's a lot of fun. Apparently, the story is really good. I think it's kind of massive at this point. Like, you really have to do a lot of playing to get through all of the story. Yeah. Anyways, so that's my 15 was the road trip. Yeah, I haven't played that one. I've heard mixed things. I've heard that it starts out good and gets worse. Like it does not maintain the same quality throughout. Realized when you tried playing Elder Scrolls. I used to. When I was in like middle and high school, MMOs were like the most magical idea to me. You know? Like playing online, there was so much you could do. You could play with these other people. You could basically live in a fantasy world, was kind of how I viewed them. So I played every MMO I could get my hands on. And then these days I don't play any. And I'm thoroughly disenchanted with them. Mm-hmm. There were some good ones. Tragedy of the MMO Star Wars Galaxies. It was so weird. This game was incredible when it came out. It like you choose your class. You could not choose to be a Jedi, but you could be a bounty hunter or like a what were some other like a smuggler, or maybe like I feel like you could have been something like a linguist or something. I don't remember everything. There was quite a few scouts and things like that, and you went out and you could like you did your combat stuff. Right, you have your blaster and you'd go and shoot womp rats or whatever. But then you could do like geological surveying for minerals, and then if you got into crafting, like you could not just build, whatever, like bits and pieces and whatever, but you could build an entire town to the point where it would get added to the map on whatever planet you were on. Like you could build a new starport city on Tatooine, or Yavin or whatever if you invested enough time and energy into it. And then there was a Jedi class in the game, but the only way to do it was to become Force sensitive. You could unlock the ability to be a Jedi by becoming Force sensitive, and you had to do that by completing a variety of like mysterious prerequisites that you had no way of knowing what they were. Like you couldn't look up a guide to become a Jedi because it was different for every account. Like you would have a randomly generated set of prerequisites that there was no way of knowing what they were, and they were pretty severe. So there were very few Jedi in the game. And if somebody went and actually became one, it was like a big deal, and then you unlock the ability to create a new character as a Jedi. But then they released an update for the game at a certain point that just ruined it. And it was tragic. First of all, they unlocked Jedi as a class for everybody. There was no more hidden, sneaky things. So obviously, at that point, you log into the game and there's nothing but Jedi everywhere. Which just kind of ruins the romance of it, kind of, like, to use an odd descriptive word, but it was just like, you log in, everybody's playing a Jedi. There's no reason not to play a Jedi. Of course you're playing a Jedi because you can, but then that means that they're not special anymore. Everyone's doing it, so there's no reason, I don't know. And the update introduced space fighting, like you could fly around in space on your ship, but it like trashed the economy because now that was the only, like, you made so much more money by just taking your starter ship and flying into space and shooting asteroids or whatever, that the rest of the game kind of became irrelevant. And I don't know, the game just crashed and died, and they took down the servers, and there's still people that host their own servers, and I think some people, like, there are active communities that like host pre that update, because this isn't my opinion, this is like everybody knows. Like, I was playing at the time and it was really sad, but it's widely known that that update just ruined the entire game. So there are still, like, it's still possible to play Star Wars Galaxies and play it pre that update, but you have to go and like find people's like private servers. I played The Matrix Online, which was interesting because it was like after The Matrix 3. So after, at that point, the story was done. And then basically the MMO officially continued the story. And they would have these big live events. So you'd be like playing, you're doing your thing. You had to choose which faction. There were 3 factions. You could work for, the humans or the agents, the machines. Because at this point there was a truce between the mankind and the machines. Or the Merovingian was sort of the wild card 3rd faction. And you'd go and you'd do things and you'd get the ability to do the big jumps, and it was kind of a rock, paper, scissors. You could do like martial arts or gunfighting. And so you kind of switch between, and they countered each other in different ways. There were, I think, 3 different martial arts that all kind of countered each other. And then you'd be like playing, and all of a sudden Morpheus shows up in the like area where all the shops are, and starts preaching to all of the players there and talking about what happened to Neo and what's going on with the machines. And then agents show up and they start taking over players, and so all of a sudden these players are now agents and they're all fighting each other, and it was like bonkers and really interesting and cool. But then that game kind of died out. So the sad thing about some MMOs is, like, unless you're World of Warcraft, that's taken a big hit in recent years because of the horrible business practices and also just the horrible, monstrous, like, things that some of the bosses have been caught doing. But it's still going, World of Warcraft. So unless you're that, it's tough. I don't know. It's because just sometimes, it's like the game gets shut down and that's it. Unless you like host your own private server or find someone else's, the game's gone. Like, it's not going to get any more updates ever again. So that's kind of the weirdness of MMOs. So I'm gonna be. I've played dozens though, and some were good and some not good. So I've spent half an hour talking about Final Fantasy and MMOs. So, last time, Lilith has some weird. They might be. There's these 2 women. The feeling that I get from them is that she has transformed snakes into humans. Maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe it's not snakes, but that's the feeling I get from these two women. That she, I don't know, is using as weapons or something. So let's see, they had dealt with those dwarfs, and they landed outside of Genua, which did not go well, because it was not a grassy clearing they landed on, it was a bog. They reluctantly were allowed into the city. The guards did not like the fact that they were grubby. Apparently, being grubby is enough to get you denied entry into Genua. We heard a little bit of Cockney rhyming slang. We saw how over-policed Genua is. They had trouble getting someplace to stay until they eventually kind of forced their way into I think they ended up actually sleeping in a stable, didn't they? Yes, because Magrat ducked out in the morning on her own while plucking hay from her hair. And then Nanny took off to go up to the palace, and Granny was left on her own and seemed a little grumpy about that. One of those things of like, complaining the whole time you're with your traveling companions, but not actually wanting to be on your own and actually being kind of sad about being left behind. And then Granny happened upon an execution. The guards caught him thieving. And then the last thing that we covered was Magrat meeting Ella, who had certain preconceptions about how fairy godmothers are supposed to be that Magrat did not necessarily fit, but they went in for a cup of tea anyways. And that's where we're at. In my copy, we're on page 199. So, I'm going to get to it. Here we go. The iridescent women got into an open-topped carriage. Beautiful as they were, Granny noted, they walked awkwardly. Well, they would. They wouldn't be used to legs. Snakes, I'm telling you. Not like that's some brilliant intuition on my part. She also noticed the way people didn't look at the carriage. It wasn't that they didn't see it. It was simply that they wouldn't let their gaze dwell on it, as if merely recognizing it would lead them into trouble. And she noticed the coach horses. They had better senses than the humans did. They knew what was behind them, and they didn't like it at all. She followed them as they trotted, flat-eared and wild-eyed, through the streets. Eventually, they were driven into the driveway of a big and dilapidated house near the palace. Granny lurked by the wall and noted the details. Plaster was dropping off the house walls, and even the knocker had fallen off the door. How could that have happened? Granny Weatherwax did not believe in atmospheres. She did not believe in psychic auras. Being a witch, she'd always thought, depended more on what you didn't believe. But she was prepared to believe that there was something very unpleasant in that house. Not evil. The two not exactly women weren't evil, in the same way that a dagger or a sheer cliff isn't evil. Being evil means being able to make choices. But the hand wielding a dagger or pushing a body over a cliff could be evil, and something like that was going on. She really wished that she didn't know who was behind it. People like Nanny Ogg turn up everywhere. It's as if there's some special morphic generator dedicated to the production of old women who like a laugh and aren't averse to the odd pint, especially of some drink normally sold in very small glasses. You find them all over the place, often in pairs, Footnote. Always in front of you in any queue for a start. End of footnote. They tend to attract one another. Possibly they broadcast inaudible signals indicating that here is someone who could be persuaded to go, ooh, at pictures of other people's grandchildren. Nanny Ogg had found a friend. Her name was Mrs. Pleasant. She was a cook, and she was the first black person Nanny had ever spoken to. Footnote. The footnote reads, racism was not a problem on the Discworld because, what with trolls and dwarfs and so on, speciesism was more interesting. Black and white lived in perfect harmony and ganged up on green. End of footnote. So, she was the first black person Nanny had ever spoken to. She was also a cook of that very superior type who spends most of the time holding court in a chair in the center of the kitchen, apparently taking very little heed of the activity going on around her. Occasionally she'd give an order, and they'd only need to be occasionally, because she'd seen to it over the years that people either did things her way or not at all. Once or twice, with some ceremony, she'd get up, taste something, and maybe add a pinch of salt. Such people are always ready to chat to any wandering peddlers, herbalists, or little old women with cats on their shoulders. Grebo rode on Nanny's shoulder as though he'd just eaten the parrot. "You'd be a-comin' here for fat lunchtime, then," said Mrs. Pleasant. "Helping a friend with a bit of business," said Nanny. "My, these biscuits are tasty." "I means, I see by your eye," said Mrs. Pleasant, pushing the plate nearer to her, "that you are of a magical persuasion." "Then you sees a lot further than most people in these parts," said Nanny. "You know, what 'ud improve these biscuits no end 'ud be something to dip 'em in. What do you think?" "How about something with bananas in it?" "Bananas would be just the thing," said Nanny, happily. Mrs. Pleasant waved imperiously at one of the maids, who set to work. Nanny sat on her chair, swinging her stumpy legs and looking around the kitchen with interest. A score of cooks were working with the single-mindedness of an artillery platoon laying down a barrage. Huge cakes were being constructed. In the fireplaces, whole carcasses of animals were being roasted. I was confused by this next sentence until I got to the end of it. Turnspit dogs galloped in their treadmills. There was a moment of worry. Treadmills to run the turnspits, apparently. A huge man with a bald head and a scar right across his face was patiently inserting little sticks into sausages. Nanny hadn't had any breakfast. Grebo had some breakfast, but this didn't make any difference. They were both undergoing a sort of exquisite culinary torture. They both turned, as if hypnotized, to watch two maids stagger by under a tray of canapes. "I can see you is a very observant woman, Mrs. Ogg," said Mrs. Pleasant. "Just a slice," said Nanny, without thinking. "I also determines," Mrs. Pleasant said, after a while, "that You have a cat of no usual breed upon your shoulder there.
You're right there.
I knows I'm right. A brimming glass of yellow foam was slid in front of Nanny. She looked at it reflectively and tried to get back to the matter in hand.
So, she said, where would I go, do you think, to find out about how you do magic and...
Would you like something to eat? Said Mrs. Pleasant.
What? My word!
Mrs. Pleasant rolled her eyes. Not this stuff. I wouldn't eat this stuff, she said bitterly. Nanny's face fell.
But you cook it,
she pointed out. Only 'cause I'm told to. The old Baron knew what good food was. This stuff, it's nothing but pork and beef and lamb and rubbish for them that never tasted anything better. The only thing on 4 legs that's worth eating is alligator. I mean real food. Mrs. Pleasant looked around at the kitchen. Sarah! She shouted. One of the sub-cooks turned around. Yes'm? Me and this lady is just going out. Just you see to everything, okay? Yes'm. Mrs. Pleasant stood up and nodded meaningfully at Nanny Ogg. Walls have ears, she said.
Cool. Do they?
We going to go for a little stroll. They were, it now seemed to Nanny Ogg, 2 cities in Genua. There was the white one, all new houses and blue-roofed palaces. Blue-roofed palaces, huh? I think we can all picture a certain white-walled, blue-roofed palace. It might have a fairy flying overhead. All new houses and blue-roofed palaces. And around it, and even under it, was the old one. The new one might not like the presence of the old one, but it couldn't quite ever do without it. Someone, somewhere, has to do the cooking. Nanny Ogg quite liked cooking, provided there were other people around to do things like chop up the vegetables and wash the dishes afterward. Same. She'd always reckoned that she could do things to a bit of beef that the bullock had never thought of. But now, she realized, that wasn't cooking. Not compared to cooking in Genua. It was just staying alive as pleasantly as possible. Cooking anywhere outside Genua was just heating up things like bits of animals and birds and fish and vegetables until they went brown. And yet, the weird thing was that the cooks in Genua had nothing edible to cook. At least, not what Nanny would have thought of as food. To her mind, food went around on 4 legs. Or possibly 1 pair of legs and 1 pair of wings. Or at least it had fins on. The idea of food with more than 4 legs was an entirely new kettle of miscellaneous swimming things. They didn't have much to cook in Genua, so they cooked everything. Nanny had never heard of prawns or crawfish or lobsters.
It just looked to her as though the citizens of Genua dredged the river bottom and boiled whatever came up.
That's something I've never had. I've seen videos of southern, like, seafood boils, right? Where they take, like, a bag of shucked corn and they dump it into a pot, and then they take, several bags of seasoning and they dump that in, and then they dump in bags of prawns and, just everything, and it just goes on. And then at the end, and it boils for a while, and then as far as I'm aware, the correct method of serving is they lay out a plastic tablecloth over a table, like a picnic table, and then they dump it onto the tablecloth. And I'm just like, it just, I don't know. Honestly, I mean, it's probably delicious, and it seems like it's probably a lot of fun. It's not something I've ever experienced, but I've seen some videos of it, and I'm just like, really? That's just a whole thing, huh? And looking at the comments afterwards, it's full of people being like, oh, I would have done this differently, or I would have added some of this, and I guess it's a whole thing. Not something that I've ever had. Southern cuisine is not something that I have a lot of experience with. Anyway, boiled whatever came up. Okay, now I'm thinking that I've got a typo in mine here, because my copy here says, the point was that a good German cook could more or less take the squeezings of a handful of mud, a few dead leaves, and a pinch or two of some unpronounceable herbs, and produce a meal to make a gourmet burst into tears of gratitude, and swear to be a better person for the rest of their entire life, if they could just have one more plateful. I don't think that's supposed to say German. First of all, there's no Germany on the Discworld, and second of all, I don't know if Germans are known for their cuisine to that extent. Yours says genuine? Yep. Mine definitely says German. Right there. A good German cook. Yours says genuine. That's gotta be more. Mine's had a couple of weird bits in it. That sounds like autocorrect, yeah. But that's a weird one. I don't think I've seen anything quite like that in one of these overzealous spell check. Good German cook. I mean, not to take too heavy a shot at German cooking, but maybe a little one. maybe a little shot at German cooking. I don't think that it's that this feels wrong on a couple of levels. All right, I'm going to reread that paragraph. I guess it's more of a sentence, really. The point was that a good, genuine cook could more or less take the squeezings of a handful of mud, a few dead leaves, and a pinch or two of some unpronounceable herbs, and produce a meal to make a gourmet burst into tears of gratitude and swear to be a better person for the rest of their entire life if they could just have one more plateful. A good German cook could probably work wonders with potatoes and some sausages. Some bratwurst. That's what I know about German cooking. Maybe some onions and beer. German cooking is better than English. But you got a problem with beans and boiling everything, but not in the same way? Beans and potatoes and mysterious things in pies. Yeah. Anyway, it's the notorious one. It's one of the, you know, conquered the world looking for spices and decided they didn't like any of them. Nanny Og ambled along as Mrs. Pleasant led her through the market. She peered at cages of snakes and racks of mysterious tendrilled herbs. She prodded trays of bivalves. She stopped for a chat to the Nanny Og-shaped ladies who ran the little stalls that, for a couple of pennies, dispensed strange chowders and shellfish in a bun. She sampled everything. She was enjoying herself immensely. Genua, city of cooks, had found the appetite it deserved. She finished a plate of fish and exchanged a nod and a grin with the little old woman who ran the fish stall.
"Well, all this is,"
she began, turning to Mrs. Pleasant. Mrs. Pleasant had gone. "She's been Batmaned." Some people would have bustled off to look for her in the crowds, but Nanny Og just stood and thought.
"I asked about magic," she thought, "and she brought me here and left me. Because of them walls with ears in, I expect. So, maybe I got to do the rest myself."
She looked around her. There was a very rough tent a little way from the stalls, right by the river. There was no sign outside it, but there was a pot bubbling gently over a fire. Rough clay bowls were stacked beside the pot. Occasionally, someone would step out of the crowd, help themselves to a bowlful of whatever was in the pot, and then throw a handful of coins into the plate in front of the tent. Nanny wandered over and looked into the pot. Things came to the surface and sank again. The general color was brown. In your copy, is color spelled C-O-L-O-R, or is there a U in there? Because mine is just C-O-L-O-R. Where I would expect to see a U because, you know, it's British, right? The general color was brown. Bubbles formed, grew, and burst stickily with an organic blop. Yours is spelled with a U. Maybe that's what's wrong with mine. That's why Germans are in here. Because it's got American editing. It's one thing I don't like about my autocorrect. No offense to any American viewers. Yeah, I guess that was kind of a shot, wasn't it? My autocorrect, like on my phone and things, I'm always having to like go back and forcibly enter the U into like color and honor and things like that. Because I'll spell it that way and then it'll get edited out and I'm like, no, there's a U there. You put it back. Leave that alone. All right. No. Bubbles formed, grew, and burst stickily with an organic blop. Anything could be happening in that pot. Life could be spontaneously creating. Nanny Og would try anything once. Some things she'd try several thousand times. She unhooked the ladle, picked up a bowl, and helped herself.
A moment later, she pushed aside the tent flap and looked into the blackness of the interior. A figure was seated, cross-legged in the gloom, smoking a pipe. "Mind if I step inside?" said Nanny. The figure nodded. Nanny sat down. After a decent interval, she pulled out her own pipe. "Mrs. Pleasant's a friend of yours, I expect?" "She knows me." "Ah." From outside, there was the occasional clink as customers helped themselves. Blue smoke coiled from Nanny Ogg's pipe. "I don't reckon," she said, "that many people goes away without paying." "No." After another pause, Nanny Ogg said, "I expect some of 'em tries to pay with golden jewels and scented ungulates and stuff like that." "No." "Amazing." Nanny Ogg sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant noises of the market and summoning her powers. "What's it called?" "Gumbo." "It's good." "I know." "I reckon anyone who could cook like that could do anything." Nanny Ogg concentrated. "Mrs. Gogol?" That is some of the, that is some of the very few amounts of actual magicking we've seen Nanny do. I feel like there was maybe one or two other instances in Weird Sisters. And, flying a broom. She's flown the broom plenty. But other than that, I don't think she's done any in this book. And she maybe did one or two in Weird Sisters. Am I wrong? Am I forgetting anything? It's almost always Granny Weatherwax. And I think Magrat had a couple of instances in Weird Sisters. Yeah. But Magrats are pretty few and far between. And honestly, I think Nanny maybe participated in summoning a demon or something, but wasn't the sole, caster. So this is I feel like this is one of, other than flying a broom, I feel like this is the first thing that stands out of Nanny just magicked. Which is interesting. All right. "I reckon anyone who could cook like that could do anything." Nanny Ogg concentrated. "Mrs. Gogol?" She waited. "Pretty near, Mrs. Ogg." The two women stared at one another's shadowy outline, like plotters who had given the sign and countersign and were waiting to see what would happen next. "Where I come from, we call it witchcraft," said Nanny, under her breath. "Where I come from, we call it voodoo," said Mrs. Gogol. Nanny's wrinkled forehead wrinkled still further. "Ain't that all messing with dolls and dead people and stuff?" she said. "Ain't witchcraft all running around with no clothes on and sticking pins in people?" said Mrs. Gogol levelly. "Ah," said Nanny, "I sees what you mean." She shifted uneasily. She was a fundamentally honest woman. "I got to admit, though," she added, "sometimes, maybe just one pin." Mrs. Gogol nodded gravely. "Okay. Sometimes. Maybe just one zombie."
she said.
But only when there ain't no alternative.
Sure, when there ain't no alternative.
When, you know, people ain't showing respect like.
When the house needs paintin'. Nanny grinned toothily. Mrs. Gogol grinned, outnumbering her in teeth by a factor of 30.
My full name's Githa Og, she said. People calls me Nanny.
My full name's Erzuli Gogol, said Mrs. Gogol. People call me Mrs. Gogol.
The way I saw it, said Nanny, this is foreign parts, so maybe there's a different kind of magic. Stands to reason. The trees is different, the people is different, the drinks is different and has got banana in 'em, so the magic would be different too. Then I thought, Githa, my girl, you're never too old to learn.
Sure thing.
There's something wrong with this city. Felt it as soon as we set foot here.
Mrs. Gogol nodded. There was no sound for a while, but the occasional puffing of a pipe. A voice said, the occasional puffing of a pipe. Then there was a clink from outside, followed by a thoughtful pause. A voice said,
Githa Og, I know you're in there.
The outline of Mrs. Gogol took its pipe out of its mouth. That's good, she said. Good sense of taste there. The tent flap opened.
Hello, Esme,
said Nanny Og.
Blessings be on this tent,
said Granny Weatherwax, peering into the gloom.
This here's Mrs. Gogol, said Nanny. She's by way of being a voodoo lady. That's what witches are in these parts. They ain't the only witches in these parts, said Granny. Mrs. Gogol was very impressed at you detecting me in here, said Nanny. It wasn't hard, said Granny. Once I'd spotted that Grebo washing himself outside, the rest was all deduction.
Actual zombie nightmare. Ugh, that's awful. I'm sure I've had at least... that's not something I get often. I do get nightmares. And I have lots of dreams that I remember. Some weird plots and some really normal ones. But I've probably had 1 or 2 zombie dreams. I've had, generic monsters or murderers or people with guns, that sort of thing. But not very many. Like, zombies aren't really a thing. But I also don't consume very much zombie media because I just don't like zombies. So I don't play a lot of games with zombies. I don't watch zombie shows. I've never watched The Walking Dead or, whatever. I haven't watched The Last of Us or played The Last of Us. I've watched 1 or 2 zombie movies. But it's just, I don't know. It's partly that cannibalism in general is a big squick thing for me. So I don't... And zombies are very related, right? There's just it's cannibalism with extra steps. Like, I've never watched Silence of the Lambs, and I don't intend on it mainly because cannibalism is just, no, I don't like it. You can see that being an issue then. Yeah. So, I think that as a result, it's like I don't like zombies, but I don't really have zombie nightmares because I don't expose myself to zombie media. So I think it's just, it's not really in my brain enough to dream about it. Did you wink at me?
Oh, he's so cute.
Yeah. We're figuring out, we had some hiccups with what's going to happen with him during our trip, because originally my brother was going to take care of him for like the first half of our trip, because Farmos' parents are out of town for part of the first half of our trip, and when they got back they were going to take over and take him for the second half. But then I just found out that my brother can't take him for the first half because my brother's got to go out of town for some training. So we've had to work some stuff out. We know someone that does dog sitting like semi-professionally. So she's going to take care of him for most of that time that would be a problem. But it's going to be weird for him. Rafiki Reads. Rafiki Reads is rating with a party of 8. Welcome, everybody. We're reading Witches Abroad by Sir Terry Pratchett. I'm Sleet. Welcome. How's it going? I see that we have similar names in the subject matter. Rafiki as in Lion King Rafiki, I guess, based on your avatar. Hello, Rafiki. Right there. How's it going? I'm snooping on your page right now. Mostly read public domain books and poems. Rafiki means friend in Swahili. You've read The Art of War. Oh, that's a fun read. Dracula. I've read Dracula not on stream. I've read it myself. That's good. Meditations. Peter Pan. Ooh. Study in Scarlet. Very nice. Well, I like your taste, Rafiki. Winnie the Pooh, book 1. You know, it's kind of funny. What I've got sitting over here to the side, in case we get to it at some point, is the sequel to 101 Dalmatians, because I've heard it's just bizarre. The Starlight Barking. Okay. But right now we're reading Sir Terry Pratchett, which is not public domain, but we're hoping we get away with it. We've read The Hobbit, a few other Terry Pratchett books, and a lot of the Belgariad by David Eddings. We'll probably be getting back to that after this book to finish off the Belgariad. We've read 4 out of the 5 books. So what are you reading right now? Over on your side of things. A few bonsai books. That's Spinabic, who is also named after a character from a book. He is named after, well, his full name is Binbinikegabinik. Yeah, it would be, that's probably the smarter way to go about it, but I also don't earn any money here or anything like that. I literally just kind of am doing it for fun, so. Origin of Species in the morning and Dante's Inferno in the evenings. And on the weekends, a little lighter reading with Alice in Wonderland. Those are some heavy-duty books you've got going. I don't know if you've ever read any Discworld books by Sir Terry Pratchett. They're generally hilarious and clever, but they can get a little darker at points. Non-fiction morning and fiction evenings. That's a fun schedule. I'm only here twice a week. I do Wednesday and Friday evenings. You want this, Nick? Come say hi. Come say hi to new friends. This stream flows like a book study rather than. Yeah, that's true. We read and discuss things, so I hope that gets me a little leeway. Sean Guy, you only read books that Rafiki reads to you. That absolutely counts. I think that people who don't hold a book in their hands and read it that way get more flack than they deserve. Audiobooks are absolutely valid, Such a cute pupper as he ran off. Yeah, no, in general, I don't worry about it too much. So yeah, the Discworld's got a bunch of different books, they're all by Sir Terry Pratchett. If you're not familiar, they're all kind of fantasy satire. Oh, I see. You read a lot too, mostly Star Wars books. Oh, okay. Now, I'm a Star Wars fan, but I have not read I've heard fantastic things about some of the book series of Star Wars books, but I haven't read very much. In fact, I think the last Star Wars book I read was Galaxy of Fear, something from that series, which was basically like the Star Wars taking a shot at doing a Goosebumps type of book. Boba Fett showed up and shot a zombie or something. I don't know. It was weird. And that was decades ago. You remember those? I think there was a couple of them. I don't think they were good. It was like Goosebumps, yeah. It's the oral tradition of reading. Listening to somebody else tell a story. You remember those, though? Yeah, I think that because I hadn't really read any other Star Wars books at that point, and I think that was a bad first experience for me because it was kind of like I had this feeling of like there's an entire galaxy of Star Wars, right? At least one, and this book was centered around these like kids, and yet still somehow Boba Fett shows up, right? It was like I'm not reading Star Wars to get a cameo from someone from the movie. There's a whole galaxy. Give me a new story. Give me something different. Yeah. Read all of the novels, and then Disney bought Star Wars and took the character that you named your daughter after away. Oh no! Don't tell me. Let me guess. There's what? I'm not good because I haven't read those books, but Jade or Mara Jade. Mara Jade was a significant female character that I am aware of from the books. Nope. Okay. All right. Well, that was my best shot. Jaina. Well, I tried. Han and Leia's daughter. Well, you know what? I like that name anyways, so nuts to Disney. I said it. Anyway, so yeah, the Discworld is sort of a fantasy world of satire. A lot of shots taken at real world stuff. Some very clever observations on human nature. Snuck in through humorous methods. And this is the second book, or third, depending on how you count it, about following a group of witches. But there's other characters that have their own sort of series of books, like there's The Guards, which is primarily about Sam Vimes and Carrot Ironfounderson. And then there's sort of a line of about the world getting into a bit of an industrial revolution and things like that. So, yeah, so we are currently reading. This book is about three witches, one of which inherited the role of a fairy godmother, and they've traveled to the city of Genua, which is sort of a southern, like, it's set around the time of Mardi Gras, which has been translated to Fat Lunchtime. Yeah, kind of New Orleans-y. So the two of the witches have just met up with a voodoo woman named Mrs. Gogol, who makes a really mean gumbo. And they're trying to figure out what is going on in Genua, where it seems like fairy tales are taking over in kind of a sinister way. That's roughly where we're at. So I'm going to get back to reading, and you can see whether you like my style. What if a certain mouse-themed theme park was in New Orleans? Yeah, a little bit of that. And what if there was something sinister behind it, which, let's be real, it's not much of a what if. All right. So, in the gloom of the tent, Nanny had formed a mental picture of Mrs. Gogol as being old. The walls have big, round, black ears. What she hadn't expected, when the voodoo lady stepped out into the open air, was a handsome, middle-aged woman, taller than Granny. Mrs. Gogol wore heavy gold earrings, a white blouse, and a full red skirt with flounces. Nanny could feel Granny Weatherwax's disapproval. What they said about women with red skirts was even worse than whatever they said about women with red shoes, whatever that was. Mrs. Gogol stopped and raised an arm. There was a flurry of wings. Grebo, that's Nanny Ogg's cat, who had been rubbing obsequiously against Nanny's leg, looked up and hissed. The largest and blackest cockerel Nanny had ever seen had settled on Mrs. Gogol's shoulder. It turned on her the most intelligent stare she had ever seen on a bird. Hopefully I don't get some kind of infringement for this next line. I'm really sorry that you all came in on this. It's not normally like this, I promise. But this is Nanny Ogg. My word, she said, taken aback. That's the biggest cock I've ever seen, and I've seen a few in my time. I'm not going to censor it. Mrs. Gogol raised one disapproving eyebrow. She never had no proper upbringing, said Granny. What with living next to a chicken farm and all, is what I was going to say next, said Nanny. This is Legba, a dark and dangerous spirit, said Mrs. Gogol. She leaned closer and spoke out of the corner of her mouth. Between you and me, he just a big black cockerel, but you know how it is. It pays to advertise, Nanny agreed. This is Grebo. Between you and me, he's a fiend from hell. Well, he's a cat, said Mrs. Gogol generously. It's only to be expected. The next bit is a letter that Nanny has been writing home to her family. Dear Jason and everyone, isn't it amazing the things what happen when you don't expect it? For example,
We met Mrs. Gogol, who works as a cook by day, cook, but she spelled it wrong, but is a voodoo witch. You mustn't believe all the stuff about black magic, etc. This is a blind. She's just like us, only different. It's true about the zombies, though, but it's not what you think.
It's true about the zombies. Genua was a strange city, Nanny decided. You got off the main streets, walked along a side road, went through a little gate, and suddenly there were trees everywhere, with moss and them llamas hanging from them, and the ground began to wobble underfoot and became swamp. Trees and llamas hanging from... What is it? Trees everywhere with moss and them llamas hanging from them. Like, that's how it's spelled. Like, llamas? Alright. The ground began to... Wow. Is that another editing? I'm guessing it's a joke that Nanny misunderstanding something, but I can't imagine what. Nanny is not a reliable narrator. We'll check. All right. On either side of the track, there were dark pools in which, here and there, among the lilies, were the kind of logs the witches had never seen before. I'm guessing they're gators. Yep. Yours says llamas too. All right.
Them's bloody big newts, she said.
They're alligators.
By gods, they must get good grub.
Yeah. Mrs. Gogol's house itself looked a simple affair of driftwood from the river, roofed with moss and built out over the swamp itself on 4 stout poles. It was close enough to the center of the city that Nanny could hear street cries and the clip-clop of hooves. But the shack, in its little swamp, was wreathed in silence.
Don't people bother you here?
Said Nanny. Not them as I don't want to meet. The lily pads moved. A V-shaped ripple drifted across the nearest pool. Self-reliance, said Granny approvingly. That's always very important. Nanny regarded the reptiles with a calculating stare. They tried to match it, and gave up when their eyes started watering.
I reckon I could just do with a couple of them at home, she said thoughtfully, as they slid away again. Jason could dig another pond, no problem. What was it you said they ate?
Anything they want to. I knows a joke about alligators, said Granny, surprisingly, in the tones of one announcing a great and solemn truth.
You never, said Nanny Og. I never heard you tell a joke in your whole life.
Just because I don't tell 'em don't mean I don't know 'em, said Granny haughtily. It's about this man.
What man?
Said Nanny. This man went into an inn. Yes, it was an inn. And he saw a sign. The sign said, "We serve every kind of sandwich." So he said, "Get me an alligator sandwich, and make it quick." They looked at her.
Nannyog turned to Mrs. Gogol. So, you live alone here, then? She said brightly. Not a living soul around? In a manner of speaking, said Mrs. Gogol. You see, the point is, alligators are... Granny began in a loud voice, and then stopped. The shack's door had opened. And make it quick. Granny tried to tell a joke. Snappy. Yeah.
You do a dance? Oh, look at him dance. You can do it. Yeah, good boy. Oh boy. This was another big kitchen. Footnote. The footnote reads, as Desiderata said, fairy godmothers tend to get heavily involved with kitchens. Oh, I see. Why don't I read... You're getting sleepy. I'm pretty tired myself. I'll go to the next break, unless it's real far away. A couple of pages. I'll read the next couple of pages, and then we'll call it for the night. This was another big kitchen. Once upon a time, it had provided employment for 6 cooks. Now it was a cave, its far corners shadowy, its hanging saucepans and tureens dulled by dust. The big tables had been pushed to one side and stacked almost ceiling high with ancient crockery. The stoves, which looked big enough to take whole cows and cook for an army, stood cold. In the middle of the gray desolation, someone had set up a small table by the fireplace. It was on a square of bright carpet. A jam jar contained flowers that had been arranged by the simple method of grabbing a handful of them and ramming them in. The effect was a little area of slightly soppy brightness in the general gloom. Ella shuffled a few things around desperately, and then stood looking at Magrat with a sort of defensively shy smile. Silly of me, really. I expect you're used to this sort of thing, she said. Yes. Oh, yes. All the time, said Magrat. It was just that I expected you to be a bit older. Apparently you were at my christening. Ah, yes, said Magrat. Well, you see, the thing is, still, I expect you can look like whatever you want, said Ella helpfully. Ah, yes, Ella looked slightly puzzled for a moment, as if trying to work out why, if Magrat could look like whatever she wanted, she'd chosen to look like Magrat. Well now, she said, what do we do next? You mentioned tea, said Magrat, buying time. Oh, sure. Ella turned to the fireplace, where a blackened kettle hung over what Granny Weatherwax always called an optimist's fire. Footnote. 2 logs and hope. End of footnote. What's your name? She said over her shoulder. Magrat, said Magrat,
sitting. That's a nice name, said Ella politely. Of course, you know mine. Mind you, I spend so much time cooking over this wretched thing now that Mrs. Pleasant calls me Embers. Silly, isn't it? Ember Ella, thought Magrat. I'm fairy godmothering a girl who sounds like something you put up in the rain. You like it? Emberella. It could use a little work, she conceded. I haven't the heart to tell her off. She thinks it sounds jolly, she said. I think it sounds like something you put up in the rain. Oh, I wouldn't say that, said Magrat. Who's Mrs. Pleasant? She's the cook at the palace. She comes around to cheer me up when they're out. Ella spun around, holding the blackened kettle like a weapon. I'm not going to that ball, she snapped. I'm not going to marry the prince. Do you understand? The words came out like steel ingots. Right, said Magrat, taken aback by their force. He looks slimy. He makes my flesh crawl, said Embers darkly. They say he's got funny eyes, and everyone knows what he does at night. Everyone bar one, Magrat thought. No one ever tells me things like that. Aloud, she said, Well, it shouldn't be too much to arrange. I mean, normally it's marrying princes that's the hard bit. Not for me, it isn't, said Embers. It's all been arranged. My other godmother says I've got to do it. She says it's my destiny. Other godmother, said Magrat. Everyone gets two, said Ella. The good one and the bad one. You know that. Which one are you? Magrat's mind raced. Oh, the good one, she said. Definitely. Funny thing, said Ella. That's just what the other one said, too. Embers Ella. All right. Dun, dun, dun. Well, that was a fun bit. Tonight's reading. Still always odd reading a book that isn't broken into chapters. All right, I'm going to call it there. Well, thank you very much again to that Sean guy and Rafiki, soon to be changing name to Friend or something, for coming through. And thanks for sticking around. Yeah, you have a good one too. I like your little charity snowflake. Yeah, hopefully we'll see you again. I'm definitely going to follow your page as well, of course. I'll try to stop by sometime. Did that work? Why does it work? Dang it. Try that one. So, do I plan to read Friday? Yeah, no, this Friday should work. That might change depending on what's going on with subject removal on House Sale.
But hopefully this Friday should work, and then after that, it'll be a little up in the air. The following Wednesday will be the 19th. That's a maybe. Thank you, Farmhouse. Yes. If you look up Sleet Reads on YouTube, I put all the streams up on there after. Oh, he's giving me such a look. But yeah, I should be back here on Friday and possibly next Wednesday. We will see what's happening at that point. Maybe even the Friday after that, the 21st. Could be. Because things don't really start happening until the 23rd and the 25th. So after the 21st, I'm probably going to be on a break for a while I fly away to Japan. And also sell my house and start looking for a new one. All right. Have a lovely evening, everyone. With that, let's see if anyone is... Yeah, no one on my list is streaming right now. Flying to Japan. Yeah, I'm going to Japan for 3 weeks in May. May 2nd to the 23rd. Going to Tokyo and Kyoto. And then probably also Nara and maybe Osaka. It's just a vacation, so it's not for, it's got tickets to the Studio Ghibli Museum, which that is, just getting the tickets meant Nara is pretty cool. Yeah, I'm going to get headbutted by some deer. Yeah, we got tickets to the museum. The tickets opened up and we had to refresh the page for an hour and a half before we were able to get the tickets. And by that point, days were disappearing and whatever, but we got a time that works for us. But yeah, it took an hour and a half of like 3 or 4 different people refreshing the page before one of us got through. So everyone was trying to help us get, just in case it worked for someone and not someone else. And yeah, it was like, oh, okay, one of the days is booked up now, and there goes another one, and oh, we can't get in. But we eventually did, so we got tickets. So that's super exciting. And we found out that our hotel that we're staying at in Tokyo is apparently, it's called Shiba Park Hotel, because it's right next to Shiba Park, which I think is named after a prince, not the dog. Maybe the dog's named after the prince, I don't know. And apparently it is known for having a lovely view of Tokyo Tower, which is the, Japanese Eiffel Tower, except in Tokyo. And I think it's actually bigger than the Eiffel Tower. And it's like white and orange. It's not the famous Doge. I think it's apparent the park is, I think, named after Prince Shiba, who maybe the dog is named after that prince. Possibly, I don't actually know. I haven't researched it too thoroughly. So that's our Tokyo hotel, and then we're spending a night at an onsen, a hot spring hotel, on our way to Kyoto, where we're spending 2 weeks in Kyoto, and then, day tripping out from there. So, it sounds like you've been to Japan, Rafiki. So if you have suggestions, come back and tell me on Friday. I'd love to get recommendations of places to visit, because we don't have the whole trip planned out yet. But I'm going to wrap things up. So, have a lovely evening. Thank you for visiting. I hope you had fun. And I'll be back here on Friday, assuming that, house selling shenanigans don't get in the way or anything like that, which I don't anticipate. Yeah. So have a great night. Have a great rest of your week. I'll see you on Friday. Good night. Bye.